Thank you so much for joining. Obviously, some of this, if any of you attended um, the open day, I'll be going over some of the similar bits, but then we're going to deep dive a little bit more into one of the kind of core modules that we have on the MSc Developmental Psychopathology and the MA Research Methods in Developmental Psychology. So I'm Dr. Karen McLennan, and I'm the current program director of these two courses. So in the session, I'll give a kind of introduction of the aim of the kind of programs in general, so a little bit of an overview of those, a bit more about the programs, some career stuff related to our programs. Then I'll go into the academic taster session kind of part of this, and then there'll be time for any questions at the end. Obviously, at any point, if you do have any questions, feel free just to jump in. That's absolutely fine as well. So the aim of our programs is to provide advanced training in the area of atypical development and typical development. In these programs, you learn from a range of experts across different topics in these areas. We want our students to gain a real in-depth knowledge and understanding of developmental psychology and psychopathology, as well as to gain advanced research training. So this is kind of a step up from any undergraduate programs. These courses are really relevant for a whole range of different careers, but especially a lot of our students are interested in careers in clinical or educational psychology, but also in research and continuing on in research training. So students choose our programs for a range of different reasons, but a previous survey of our students, they told us that the reason why they choose our programs is some have a desire for an applied career in psychology, either in clinical or education. Some have said that it's a desire to just generally do research and continue in research in the area of developmental psychology. Some students have a desire to work with children or certain vulnerable groups in a very broad sense. Students also have a general interest in this area, but might not have any particular plans to continue on in certain routes after their masters. They just have an interest in developmental psychology. Also, students join us because of the reputation of the department of psychology, and of course of the reputation of Durham University being really, really well renowned. Also students join us because they want to receive excellent education from experts in this area of research. So we have kind of general class sizes of around 25 to 30. We have a mix of home and international students, around about 30 to 40% of our cohort. We teach our programs in a kind of really diverse range of formats. We have lectures, seminars, tutorials, workshops, and practicals. So it's really good because you kind of get different sessions where you'll be exposed to a range of different theory and background and research, but then also you get some really hands-on experience too. And it's all research-led education. So the lecturers that you will encounter across the courses are all experts in the fields in which they're talking to you about, and often they'll be referring to their own work at times as well when they're lecturing and teaching in the different topic areas. So you'll be assessed kind of in a range of different ways. That's might be essays, reports, posters, oral presentations, group work, literature review, of course, the dissertation and exams. And so this gives you kind of a real diverse range of assessment skills to come out with as well. So the MSc Developmental, the MSc and the MA kind of interlink a lot, and so there's a lot of overlapping components, but there's a few distinct components as well, so I'll just talk you through those. So both courses have these kinds of core developmental modules. So that's current issues in developmental psychology and psychopathology, the advanced developmental psychology review, and research design in child and clinical psychology. So these are the core developmental modules across both the programs. There's also for the MSc, which there's 3 modules which are shared with the other MSc courses in the department, which is nice because you get to engage with kind of the wider cohort in the department. And these are all related to advanced research training. So we've got statistics for psychology and behavioral science, advanced statistics as well for psychology and behavioral science, which kind of runs across term 1, and then the advanced one in term 2. And then there's critical research practice as well. So it's a good kind of combination of statistics training as well as research methods training. And then, of course, kind of the big bulk of the courses is the dissertation project, which we'll talk about these elements a little bit more in a moment. Of the MA in research methods, as you can see, the kind of core developmental modules are the same. There's just a little bit more slightly different advanced research training, which some of it is shared with the courses in the department, whereas some is actually kind of more university-wide modules. So there's interdisciplinary perspectives and practices across social research, qualitative methods and analysis, and quantitative methods and analysis, which is good because it gives you kind of more social science research methods instead of kind of the core ones. But advanced statistics for psychology and behavioral science is obviously one of the shared modules that's led within the department. So that's kind of the main difference between the 2 programs, is just the type of methods training and statistics training that you receive. Otherwise, everything else is kind of the same across the 2 programs. So ADPR, sorry, give me a sec. I just want to double check the waiting room to make sure no one's waiting. There we go. Okay. So ADPR and research design. So advanced developmental psychology review is a module usually in term 1, which gives you an in-depth a chance to write an in-depth literature review on core topics with specialist staff. So you're divided up into kind of very small groups, and you'll be working with one of our lecturers, and they will kind of give you a broad topic, and you'll get to design and develop your own literature review and the thing you want to focus on within that, with kind of very small group support to do that. And it's a really helpful module to do in advance of your dissertation, because it helps develop writing and reviewing skills, which is obviously a key skill needed for your introduction of your dissertation. Then the other developmental module is the research design. Is the research design in child and clinical psychology. And this really gives you an overview and a critical view into how we should explore topics in typical and atypical development, and think about kind of very, very specific research methods within this field, as well as thinking about different assessment tools such as interviews and scales and relevant research methods. So kind of alongside your general research training, research design and statistics training, this gives you a very, very kind of discipline specific view of that. So the other core developmental module is current issues in developmental psychology and psychopathology, but that's the kind of module I'm going to focus on in this taster session. So I will talk more about what that module looks like in a moment. So the dissertation, as I said, is kind of a very core component of the courses, and it's a highlight of the programs, and it runs throughout the year with the submission usually at the very start of September 2021. I've gone back in time. It's 2020, whatever it might be, 2025, and or at the end of August. It depends on the dates for the assessment. And for the dissertation, you typically work with a supervisor in a pair, and you get a real kind of get involved in depth, the depth and complexity of the topic that you might be working within. You don't always work in a pair. Sometimes it might be a slightly larger group, or sometimes you might be exploring a topic just for yourself. But kind of working in pairs is the usual way that we do it. And you'll get exposed and the opportunity to engage with a range of cutting edge topics, and you'll be working with experts in their particular field. Your supervisor will, some supervisors, because it's developmental, and a lot of the supervisors do work with specific groups such as infants or babies or neurodivergent people, autistic people, people with various mental health challenges. Because of this, you'll get an opportunity to really engage and work in research the way that your supervisor is, but it means that sometimes the supervisor will already have a kind of research idea or a kind of domain or a topic to work in, so you can get involved with the kind of more finer details of the research design, but it might already be reasonably predetermined. But then also there's opportunities to really, if there's something you're very, very interested in and the supervisor is able to supervise that, they'll give you an opportunity to develop your own kind of ideas as well. So there's a lot of kind of variety and choice involved in the dissertation topics. And because of this, a lot of our students' dissertations actually go on to be published. There's just a few examples here of some of the papers that have been published from dissertation projects. So it's an excellent opportunity, especially for students who want to go on and continue to do either clinical training or further research training, or just to kind of, go on your CV if you want to go out into a certain career in this area. It's really good, obviously, to have some form of publication. So this just shows kind of how applied and how engaged with the research our dissertation projects are. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about employability. So our students tend to go on into a range of careers, but some of the common ones that students go into is working as assistant psychologists, or they might go into teaching and teaching assistant roles. Some go on to continue their research training and go into PhD positions. We also have students who go on to learning or SEN support, working with schools. We also have students who go on to become mental health support workers. We also have students go into research assistant positions, and also areas of child protection. So it's very diverse, but obviously there's kind of, lots of really, really directly relevant careers that our students go into. Okay, so I'm going to now jump into current issues in developmental psychology and psychopathology. And as I said, we'll have an opportunity for kind of questions at the end. So this module runs in terms 1 and terms 2, so it's kind of across the main bulk of your teaching terms, and it really is like a highlight of our program. It's the kind of core lectures that really develop that developmental, it help you develop your developmental knowledge, and in term 1 we focus on areas of typical development. In term 2, we kind of think more about that psychopathology, so different developmental pathways. So you've got kind of this real deep dive into lots and lots of different topics. So in term 1, our typical development, although these might change every year, because as I said, we want our lectures are always led by experts in those areas. So the lecturers will be lecturing on their particular topic. So as lecturers might change each year, there might be slightly different topics. But in recent years, we've had typical development topics relating to cognitive development, fetal development, executive function, sleep, language, and creativity development. We also have a workshop that we usually run. Last few years, it's been related to using standardized assessments in developmental research, so such as assessments related to language or intelligence, like IQ tests. And then in term 2, after you've kind of had that real good overview of different typical development pathways, we think about different developmental pathways. And some of the topics that we tend to cover in this term include autism, Williams syndrome, developmental language disorder, ADHD, psychosis, affective disorders, and like aging older adults. And also we have a workshop in this term usually as well, that's aimed at clinical skills, and we also sometimes have clinicians come in to lecture as well. So it's a very, very broad module, but it really covers a wide range of different developmental topics. So you can kind of get an idea about what the learning outcomes are for this module. There's a few different areas that we kind of aim for those outcomes to be. So one of those is subject-specific knowledge. So the students who undertake this module should gain an understanding of key theories of cognition and behaviour within the fields of typical and atypical developmental psychology. To understand research or methodological issues and challenges in the field, to understand the relevance of classic studies and the impact on modern research issues within the field. So although we obviously consider some of those classical things that we the core kind of classical studies in this area, because it is all led by current leaders in these fields, we also really think about those current issues in modern research, and also to evaluate the applied and intervention implications of differences in cognition and behaviour. So we really also have that applied kind of practical lens on it as well, which is really handy for students interested in going on into clinical or educational careers. We also hope students gain subject-specific skills, so to develop an understanding of the links between developmental psychology and developmental psychopathology, which obviously typical atypical development in this sense, and to develop critical thinking abilities concerning research methods used in these fields as well. And obviously there's some kind of real key skills which kind of go across most of our modules in this course. So it's developing written communication skills, to develop oral communication skills, and to develop the ability to learn independently as well. So wide range of kind of subject-specific skills and key skills as well. So the teaching formats for this module is primarily lectures. So it's a kind of weekly lecture that's delivered on a different issue, and it's weekly, and we're going to outline the schedule also below, in the next slide. Interactive work, including workshops as well, to kind of give you that interactive element, and there might be kind of a variety of different ones. So for example, the module may include kind of discussions of papers, so there might be work kind of set in advance of lectures. So for example, sometimes this is done in advance of the first lecture. There's also often opportunity for group debate and discussion of critical methodological issues, and also hands-on experience with assessments that we use in this field of research. So although we do kind of, some of the lectures will literally just be a lecturer talking to you about the topic, and you're expected to go and do extra reading, there'll also be elements of kind of interactive work as well. The way this module is assessed is kind of in three ways. So we have a formative assessment, which is in the form of a 200-word paper introduction, which is due kind of earlier on in term one. And this is a really, really good opportunity for students to get some feedback on their written work at a very early stage without it kind of going into your final grade. So you, it's purely to be able to get that feedback element. And often it's on kind of the whatever topics taught in the second lecture, and we often try and keep it quite broad, so you're able to get basically a good amount of feedback and choose a topic that interests you. That also sets you up nicely for your summative assessment, which is your first summative assessment, which is a 2,500-word extended essay, and the essay question allows you to choose topics from across the module to focus on. So again, it's a very broad question that allows you to really focus in on an area that's of interest to you. So your kind of formative feedback should give you a really, really good basis to do well in that summative. And then the next summative and final summative for this module is a 2-hour exam in the May-June exam period. And it's an essay-based exam where students are required to answer 2 essay questions within 2 hours. And there's students have to select one question to answer from part A and one question from part B, and that basically is term 1 topics versus term 2 topics, so atypical and then typical, or typical then atypical development. So yeah, it gives you kind of the ability to answer questions from either parts of the module. I've just put a little disclaimer that sometimes things change and topics change, and assessments can change, but this is the format for next year. So just to give you an idea about the topics, so this is literally everything and everybody who taught it in this current academic year that's coming to an end. So you can kind of get an idea about some of the things. As I said, these might change coming up in the next year, but some of these will remain. So in teaching week 1, I led a session on introduction to the module, to give kind of an overview about what to expect and some kind of really broad issues in research and knowledge development in the area of developmental psychology and psychopathology. And then in in lecture 2, Anna led a session on cognitive development, and that's the topic that the formative essay was on. Then in week 3, Ben Alderson-Day led a session on executive function. Week 4 was Nadia Reisland talking about prenatal development. And then in week 5, she also led a lecture on pregnancy, stress and depression. And then in week 6, Sam Forbes led a lecture on sleep and early development. And then in week 7, he did developmental cognitive neuroscience and adversity. And then week 8, Bruce Rawlings led a lecture on innovation and creativity. So week 8 was then also the same when the deadline for the formative essay was due. So as you can see, there's quite a few weeks. It gives you like a really long amount of time to be able to develop that essay to submit. And then week 9 Zana Clay led language development. And then in week 10, I led a workshop, which was on cognitive behavioural and mental health assessments. So we had lots of different assessments in the room, and students got to go around and engage with the different assessments, hear a little bit about them, see how they work, because obviously often we get to just hear about these conceptually. So actually being able to see the materials for these assessments gives students a really good idea about how these things work and how we might actually administer these assessments. So that's all term 1. As you can see, it runs from October through to the start of December. Then kicking off in January, our term 2 lectures are all on atypical development or developmental diversity. So in the teaching week 11, on the first lecture of that term, I led a lecture on with an introduction to the study of developmental conditions, and also an overview of ADHD, and I introduced neurodiversity in that week as well. And then in teaching week 12, Debbie Ryby led a lecture on Williams syndrome. In week 13, Ben Alderson-Day came back to do a lecture on psychosis and schizophrenia. Week 14, Hamie Lee Masson did a lecture on developmental cognitive neuroscience insights into autism. And teaching week 15, Ben also did a lecture on affective disorders. Then in week 16, I did a lecture on autism. And week 17 was our clinical skills workshop, which was led by Ben, but we invited in Dr. Steph Common, who's a clinical psychologist, to come and talk about clinical skills. So for anybody who's super interested in going on to do clinical training or any form of career around clinical psychology, it's a really, really good workshop for that. And it gives you an opportunity to ask a clinical psychologist lots of questions about the career, etc. Then in teaching week 18, Ben did a lecture on deafness. Week 19, I did a lecture on sensory differences, kind of transdiagnostically. And then lastly, in teaching week 20, I've hosted Dr. Oliver Bakama, who's also a clinical psychologist, to come and do a lecture on the clinical experience of aging. So again, there's another opportunity there. He's always open to us having questions asked around being a clinical psychologist. As I said, these can change each year. We often might see different clinical psychologists come in, or different kind of external specialists. But in that last week as well is when the summative essay is due. And again, it's set kind of earlier in the term. I can't remember if it's the first lecture of the term, but it's quite early on. So it gives you a really good amount of time to work on that essay as well. So hopefully that's given you a really good overview of kind of what you will actually expect when you join us and undertake this module. Great, so that is a whistle-stop tour of the course and kind of one of our core modules.